Apologies for this interruption, but... These following messages. It's an emergency that we bring you these following messages. Rather disturbing We're interrupting your regular programming to bring you an emergency announcement.
Good evening, I am Daniel O'Connor.
And I am Frederick Bolt, and welcome to Fractal Beard News.
Tonight, we embark on a compelling journey delving into the revelations surrounding the events of October 7 in Israel.
Recent accounts are starting to question the established Israeli narrative.
Backed up by civilian eyewitnesses, while Israeli tank operators, and even an Apache helicopter pilot sharing shocking orders they received during the breach of Gaza fences.
Notably, YouTube has taken down our video, citing concerns about misinformation. As we delved deeper, we discovered that our content touched on sensitive topics, likely explaining the attention it drew.
Despite this, we want to underline that we are committed to reporting information solely from reputable sources. The links are provided in the description below for your verification.
Our objective is to deliver accurate and reliable insights into the events we're discussing.
Before we unravel the details, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay informed with our content. Now, let's begin our in-depth exploration.
But first and foremost, I want to emphasize that some viewers may find the upcoming footage includes graphic material that may be distressing or traumatizing.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Haaretz, a prominent Israeli newspaper, has validated or supported reporting by the Gray Zone, a news outlet that had previously been labeled as conspiracy by some for its coverage. The Gray Zone had reported on an incident where Israel may have been responsible for the death of its own festival goers, and Haaretz, in this case, has acknowledged or confirmed the accuracy of the Gray Zone's reporting. This could imply that information initially considered as a conspiracy theory is now supported by more mainstream sources.
An article published by Wyatt Reed on November 21 mentions a shift in Haaretz's stance on the reporting by the Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal regarding the events of October 7. Initially dismissing Blumenthal as a conspiracy theorist, Haaretz has now acknowledged a police report confirming that partygoers at the Nova Festival, located 3 miles from the Gaza border, were killed by the Israeli military. The article, authored by Haaretz reporter Josh Briner on November 19, mentions an official investigation revealing that an IDF combat helicopter fired at the scene, hitting both terrorists and attendees. This acknowledgement suggests a validation of the earlier reporting by the Gray Zone and Max Blumenthal, indicating that their coverage was accurate and not based on conspiracy theories, as previously asserted by Haaretz.
The Israeli police issued a statement saying its investigation did not focus on IDF operations at the concert site and did not provide any indication about the harm of civilians due to aerial activity there. The Times of Israel reported on November 19.
1. Israeli military operations. Overwhelming Israeli military bases. Overrun of the Erez crossing, nerve center of Israel's Gaza siege.
According to Haaretz, the commander of the Gaza division, Brigadier General Avi Rosenfeld, entrenched himself in the division's subterranean war room together with a handful of male and female soldiers, trying desperately to rescue and organize the sector under attack. Many of the soldiers, most of them not combat personnel, were killed or wounded outside. The division was compelled to request an aerial strike against the Erez crossing base itself in order to repulse the terrorists.
Israeli military's panic and response, including airstrikes and structural damage to the Erez crossing.
The Erez crossing is the home of a massive military and coordination of government activities in the occupied territories Kogat facility, which functions as the nerve center of Israel's siege on Gaza. When it was overrun by Palestinian fighters on October 7 with droves of army bureaucrats inside, the Israeli military flew into a panic. Video released by the occupied territories Kogat facility 10 days after the battle, and the Israeli airstrike, shows severe structural damage to the roof of the Erez crossing facility.
2. Israeli Apache helicopter operations. Lack of intelligence for the pilots, leading to indiscriminate attacks.
Apache helicopter pilots have admitted to firing continuously without intelligence on targets, while tank crews were ordered to shell homes, regardless of Israeli hostages potentially inside.
The rate of fire against the thousands of terrorists was tremendous at first, and only at a certain point did the pilots begin to slow down the attacks and carefully select the targets. I understand that we have to shoot here and quickly, the commander of the Apache unit, Lieutenant Colonel E., told Mako in a separate report. Shooting at people in our territory, this is something I never thought I would do.
Another pilot in the same unit was Lieutenant Colonel A. He was describing a massive fog of confusion, saying, "I find myself in a dilemma as to what to shoot at, because there are so many of them."
Difficulty in distinguishing between Hamas fighters and Israeli civilians.
The pilots realized that there was tremendous difficulty in distinguishing within the occupied outposts and settlements who was Hamas and who was a soldier or civilian.
It turns out that the Hamas army deliberately made it difficult for the helicopter pilot and the operators of the UAVs. In the investigation, it became clear that the Hamas forces were asked in the last briefings to walk slowly into the settlements and outposts or within them, and under no circumstances to run, to make the pilots think they were Israeli.
This deception worked for a considerable time, until the Apache pilots realized they had to skip all the restrictions.
It was only around 9 in the morning that some of them began to spray the terrorists with the cannons on their own, without authorization from superiors.
On November 9, Haaretz released an audio interview with Israeli Reserve pilot Colonel Nof Erez, who said the Netanyahu administration likely invoked the notorious Hannibal Directive, which dictates that Israelis taken captive should be killed by the military rather than left in the hands of Hamas. What we saw here was a mass Hannibal, the pilot concluded.
Please note that factcheck.org has labeled this video as fake, referencing the IDF statement to Newsweek in a story published on November 13. Additionally, the French television network France allegedly debunked the claims about the video in a November 14 broadcast. An analysis cited in that report found that the infrared footage of the helicopter assault was captured at a location 10 kilometers, or 6 miles, away from the site of the music festival.
A look at the extremely viral video. It's been viewed over 30 million times on X already since it's been published. On November 9th, we have the video right here. That is a video that is 14 seconds long. It's an infrared military Air Force video where we also see the logo of the IDF on the far right. And it seems to show an IDF pilot shooting at targets on the ground from an Air Force helicopter. So let's take a look at the main accounts that are sharing this video. We have this post by Syrian Girl that's been seen over 28 million times on X already since it's been published. The post reads, breaking, Israel admits Apache helicopters fired on their own civilians running from the Supernova Music Festival. Then others take these claims even further, and they claim that these images that we see are leaked images, footage from the IDF, as they claim bombshell leaked footage from the Israeli Air Forces prove it was the IDF that took out on its own citizens with Apache helicopters on October 7th at the music festival. So a video that they show that they pretend to show IDF pilots shooting at their own civilians. Mark.
The death toll at the Supernova Music Festival was immense, and it was horrific what we saw there and what happened there. What does this video really show, Catalina?
Well, Mark, the video is real, but these claims are fake and misleading. First of all, contrary to these claims, this video does not show IDF leaked footage. The IDF published this footage themselves on their official account on X. On October 9th, we have the publication here for you where they show a compilation of images showing Israeli Air Force attacks being carried out on the Gaza Strip against Hamas terrorists. And towards the end of the compilation, as you can see, it's a 2-minute compilation. Here we found the same images as the ones that are being shared in the fake claims. This information that they published on X was also confirmed to us by the IDF via WhatsApp, where they say that the video shared on their account shows attacks in the Gaza Strips against Hamas terrorists. They also explain that more specifically, they were shooting at terrorists that were trying to penetrate into Israel. Then, also contrary to the claims, the video did not take place anywhere near the Nova Festival grounds or Israeli grounds, as demonstrated by Geo-confirmed. The video that was in the viral claims actually took place 10 kilometers away from the Nova Music Festival. It took place in this area right here, close to the Gaza Strip, close to these two kibbutz that are close to the Gaza Strips. 10 kilometers away, one from another. Hence a video that has no relation with the Nova Music Festival whatsoever. Mark.
So, disinformation, misinformation based on Israeli Defense Force testimony from the day of the attacks. Do explain.
That's right, Marco. Following the Hamas attacks on Israel that took place on October 7th, there are many testimonies that came out to speak to Israeli media. Here we have one from N12 and Ynet, reported on N12. These testimonies were IDF pilots and first responders to the Hamas attacks that day. They explained to Israeli media how difficult it was from the air to distinguish between terrorists and civilians, or between kidnappers and those who were being kidnapped in the combat arena. They explain in these articles that what they saw at the beginning of this air operation was complete chaos. And in fact, here reported by Haaretz, a journalist on X, who says that this 48-year-old man that we see in this picture was killed by the IDF after being mistakenly identified as a terrorist on that day in the Nahal Oz kibbutz. So due to the chaos that day, the risk of killing civilians was not non-existent, unfortunately. Mark.
Catalina, with Truth or Fake, thank you very much indeed.
Focus on vehicles returning to Gaza, potential involvement of Israeli captives.
Assuming the authenticity of the footage, the act of attacking Hamas militants as they were fleeing, without knowledge of Hamas holding Israeli hostages, inadvertently lends credence to the notion that Israel may have unintentionally caused harm to its own people. Those who initiated shelling or airstrikes with awareness of the potential risk to Israeli civilian casualties likely adhered to the principles outlined in the Hamble Directive.
3. Israeli tank shelling in Israeli territory. Shelling of homes in Be'eri, causing civilian casualties.
Evidence from the grey zone suggests that bodies found burned in Israel's Gaza envelope were likely victims of the Israeli military. Eyewitness testimony on an Israeli tank firing on a home in Kibbutz Be'eri, causing civilian casualties, adds weight to these claims. The grey zone allegations were confirmed by Israeli civilian Yasmin Porat, who survived a hostage standoff in Be'eri.
איך כולם נהרגו?
מהחילופי אש.
מהחילופי אש, כלומר יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן?
וככה אני מאמינה.
אוי, זה נשמע כל כך רע.
כן.
Alleged orders to shell houses to eliminate terrorists along with hostages.
First-hand testimonies from Israeli tank operators reveal shocking orders to open fire on Israeli communities during the breach of Gaza fences on October 7. The accounts highlight the indiscriminate nature of the orders, with a tank captain admitting to being directed to fire on homes in the Holed kibbutz, without knowledge of civilian presence. It also underscores the complexity faced by inexperienced tank operators, who were not adequately trained for the situation.
The discussion extends to an all-female tank company, forced into more advanced vehicles during the chaos of the Hamas assault. The Brigadier General admits the inadequacy of their training for such a complex task, resulting in firing within Israeli communities.
Destruction of homes in Kibbutz Be'eri.
מבחינת מה שאני רואה בבארי, אז יש מוקדי עשן בחלק הצפוני.
בפעם הראשונה מאז ה-7 באוקטובר, אנחנו מקבלים הזדמנות נדירה לראות מלמעלה את הטרגדיה של קיבוץ בארי, כפי שהכוחות ותושבי הקיבוץ ראו אותה בזמן אמת. בשעה 4:20 אחר הצהריים, יותר מ9 שעות אחרי שחדרו לבארי מאות מחבלים, שכונות שלמות בקיבוץ עולות באש.
אני צופה עכשיו על בארי, על החלק הצפוני. אני רואה מוקד עשן בחלק הצפוני מערבי מול הבית עלמין. שם זה הקרקלים השרופים?
התיעוד הזה חושף בפנינו את היקף הלחימה ומספר המחבלים הבלתי נתפס שהשתלטו על הקיבוץ. הוא תיעד את הטנק שסייע לכוחות בבית של פסי וירה פגזים לעבר הבית.
והם הביאו פתאום טנק, אני אומרת לאחד החיילים, תגיד, אבל אם אתם אומרים פגזים זה לא יפגע בבני ערובה? אז הוא אומר לי, לא, אנחנו רק עושים את זה בצדדים, להוריד קירות.
הוא מעצים את סימני השאלה בהתנהלות צה"ל והימ"מ מול בית עם 15 בני ערובה.
בא לראות טנק בתוך בארי, עושה על הכביש. הופה, היה שם איזה ירי. וואו.
פתאום בום נוראי, ואני לא מצליחה להזיז את הרגליים. היה לי ברור שיש פה טנק. זה היה ברור לי לגמרי. אני נפגעתי ועדי מהרסיס של הפגז של הטנק. כי זה היה ממש באותו רגע.
התיעוד החדש חושף שפגז נורה לכיוון הבית של פסי כבר בשעה 5:30 באור יום, שעה וחצי אחרי שהגיעו הכוחות לאזור. לוחמים ששהו במקום מספרים שזה היה ירי האזהרה הראשון, אחריו הטנק נפגע, והגיע טנק אחר שהשלים את
הופה, היה שם איזה ירי. וואו.
בתיעוד הבא אנחנו מקבלים חיזוק למחדל נוסף שחשפנו במהדורה. כוחות רבים שחיכו בכניסה לקיבוץ בארי בשעות אחר הצהריים ולא נכנסו פנימה. שיירת הרכבים הזו תועדה כבר בשעה 4:30 בשבת, שיא הלחימה ביישוב. היא מתחילה בכביש 232 ומגיעה עד לשער הצהוב של הקיבוץ.
באזור שעה 18:10, מה שנגלה לפניי זה פשוט סדק של מאות חיילים, מאות. עשרות מכוניות, מג"ב ואחרים, כשהחיילים מדוגמים מכף רגל עד ראש. אני פניתי באופן אישי לכל קצין שראיתי. מרב סרן, ושאלתי אותו מי מנהל האירוע, מי מפקד באירוע, והוא עבר, אמר לי לא, אני רק מפקד על 5 האלה, ועברתי קצין אחר ואמר לי אני רק מפקד על 10 האלה, וכל אחד שאלתי אותו, אבל מי מתכלל את כל האירוע, מי מפקד פה האירוע, אף אחד לא ידע, היה נראה כאוס פיקודי טוטלי. ואני אומר, חבר'ה, אם נלחמים ושוחטים משפחות, חייבים להיכנס, ואין עם מי לדבר.
אנחנו יצאנו, עברתי בין כל החיילים וצעקתי מי חוזר לבארי, מי חוזר לבארי, והלכתי לדבוקות, שלא יכול להיות שאתם עומדים פה. אנשים זועקים לעזרה בקיבוץ, כולם עומדים. אף אחד לא מדבר, אף אחד לא אומר אני.
500 חיילים בחוץ שעומדים, מאורגנים, עם כלבים, עם ציוד, עם הגנה, עם כלי רכב, עומדים בחוץ ואף אחד לא ניהל את זה. לרוץ פנימה ולמשוך ילדים החוצה מהממ"דים שנשרפים, ואימהות וזקנים. אנשים פה בכל דקה איבדו דם. והצבא שהיה כלום, היה פה בחוץ, עמד, לא הבין מה קורה פה.
בימים האלה צה"ל עסוק בלחימה ברצועת עזה, והתחקירים החשובים בנוגע למחדל ה7 באוקטובר אפילו לא החלו. התיעוד שחשפנו כאן מספק הצצה לשבת השחורה, אבל חודשיים אחרי לתושבי בארי, כמו יתר תושבי העוטף בערים, במושבים ובקיבוצים. מגיע לשמוע תשובות.
היה פשוט בעיה פיקודית, ברוח הלחימה, החתירה למגע פשוט לא הייתה שם. וזה זמנים ושעות שהיינו חייבים להציף את הקיבוץ בחיילים, נכנסו כוחות מאוד מאוד מצומצמים ומאוד קטנים. אז אם בפנים הייתה בעיה וכל היום נלחמנו לבד, ההפתעה שלנו עוד הייתה עוד יותר גדולה כשיצאנו החוצה.
הרבה שאלות שצריכות להישאל, כך נמסר מדובר צה"ל בתגובה למה שראיתם. נערוך תחקיר מפורט ומעמיק לברור הפרטים עד תום, שהמצב המבצעי יאפשר זאת, ונפרסם את ממצאיו לציבור.
Friendly fire incidents resulting in casualties among Israeli civilians.
More evidence comes from witness Daniel Rachil, who described nearly being killed after escaping from the Hamas attack on the Nova Music Festival.
We just drove on the road and I saw a square in front of me, and by the Google Maps I saw there's a kibbutz at the square, and at the kibbutz was already Israeli forces waiting. Unfortunately, with no blame, absolutely no blame at the forces, they also shot at us because we looked like terrorists. We came from their direction with a broken car that's not working very fast. So they unfortunately also shot at us, which was also very scary. After the glass that shattered from...
This was the IDF that shot at you?
No, this was like civilian forces of the kibbutz.
Addressing the fact check conducted by factcheck.org.
In response to factcheck.org's examination, it's crucial to highlight that their analysis focused on a small portion, 14 seconds, of a 2-minute and 38-second video, neglecting the comprehensive nature of the entire footage. Unfortunately, the original video, which was posted on the IDF Twitter page, is no longer available for verification purposes, contrary to FactCheck's limitations. The Fractal team retrieved the original video from the archives and meticulously examined it, focusing on skid marks, the presence of asphalted roads, and the landscape. This analysis included comparisons with previous circulating footage of the incident and satellite images to determine the accurate location.
A. Footage analysis.
On October 9, the IDF shared an extended compilation video on X. This video presented green-tinted, infrared aerial footage capturing bombings and explosions on the ground. The scenes depicted individuals alternately running and walking in response to the assault. The primary targets of the operation were fleeing vehicles and individuals on foot situated in an open space. The terrain varied, ranging from what seemed to be sandy or loose soil in some instances to dirt roads and asphalted roads in others.
B. Key observations and findings.
1. the identification of skid and yaw marks in the original video that align with those observed in drone footage after the festival, indicating a clear connection.
2. The confirmation of asphalted roads in the Apache footage, coupled with their absence in the outskirts of Gaza, strongly reinforces the assertion that the incident occurred on Israeli soil. This effectively dismisses the likelihood of highly residential areas such as Rimul, Al-Furqan, Beit Hanon, Al-Sujaya, and Jabalia refugee camp being the location in question. While there may be areas that align with our criteria, it's crucial to note the absence of any reported strikes or bombardment by any Arabic news outlets during the alleged timeframe, adding an additional layer of scrutiny to the claims.
3. Noteworthy findings from the longer compilation video shared by the IDF on October 9 include breached walls and fences, with Hamas militants returning in formations and vehicles similar to those seen in the Hamas footage. This evidence further substantiates the argument that the incident took place on Israeli soil, providing additional credibility to the Grey Zone's reporting on the events at the Nova Music Festival.
Addressing the French television network, France 24.
Let's take a look at the main accounts that are sharing this video. We have this post by Syrian Girl that's been seen over 28 million times on X already since it's been published. The post reads, breaking, Israel admits Apache helicopters fired on their own civilians running from the Supernova Music Festival. Well, Mark, the video is real, but these claims are fake and misleading. First of all, contrary to these claims, this video does not show IDF leaked footage. The IDF published this footage themselves on their official account on X.
In response to the French television network discrediting the video in a November 14 broadcast, it is crucial to emphasize that the Syrian Girl did not make any claims about leaked footage. Her arguments consistently drew from Max Blumenthal's investigation, so labeling her statements as misinformation without addressing the foundation of her arguments constitutes a weak argument and a strawman fallacy. Furthermore, the later confirmation of her claims in the video's conclusion adds another layer of contradiction and misinformation.
Following the Hamas attacks on Israel that took place on October 7th, there are many testimonies that came out to speak to Israeli media. Here we have one from N12 and Ynet, reported on N12. These testimonies were IDF pilots and first responders to the Hamas attacks that day. They explained to Israeli media how difficult it was from the air to distinguish between terrorists and civilians, or between kidnappers and those who were being kidnapped in the combat arena. They explain in these articles that what they saw at the beginning of this air operation was complete chaos. And in fact, here reported by Haaretz, a journalist on X, who says that this 48-year-old man that we see in this picture was killed by the IDF after being mistakenly identified as a terrorist on that day in the Nahal Oz kibbutz. So due to the chaos that day, the risk of killing civilians was non-existent, unfortunately. On October 9th, we have the publication here for you where they show a compilation of images showing Israeli Air Force attacks being carried out on the Gaza Strip against Hamas terrorists. And towards the end of the compilation, as you can see, it's a 2-minute compilation. Here we found the same images as the ones that are being shared in the fake claims.
Contrary to the IDF's assertions, which pinpointed the locations of the footage at Beit Hanon, Shujaya, Al-Furqan, and Rimul, a comprehensive analysis by the French channel, supported by GeoConfirmed, challenges these designations. The meticulous examination of coordinates and exact locations on the map revealed that some attacks took place on Israeli soil.
This information that they published on X was also confirmed to us by the IDF via WhatsApp, where they say that the video shared on their account shows attacks in the Gaza Strips against Hamas terrorists. They also explain that more specifically they were shooting at terrorists that were trying to penetrate into Israel. Then also contrary to the...
Additionally, while the IDF claimed that the strikes targeted militants attempting to infiltrate, the footage portrays a different narrative. Militants were observed trying to re-enter Gaza.
Claims the video did not take place anywhere near the Nova Festival grounds or Israeli grounds, as demonstrated by GeoConfirmed. The video that was in the viral claims actually took place 10 kilometers away from the Nova Music Festival. It took place in this area right here, close to the Gaza Strip, close to these two kibbutz that are close to the Gaza Strips. So 10 kilometers away, one from another.
France 24. claims that the attacks occurred 10 kilometers away from Nova and were not at the festival, with a further specification that these attacks were outside Israeli territories, near Kfar Aza and Nal Az, close to the Gaza Strip as illustrated in their video. But GeoConfirmed showed that some attacks had taken place inside Israel and around the Gaza envelope, creating a significant contradiction and propagating misinformation. It's worth noting that the Fractal team made an effort to re-verify GeoConfirmed locations, finding that only 3 out of 6 locations could be confirmed as credible. 2 were considered plausible, and 1 lacked sufficient evidence to support it. Importantly, it's crucial to acknowledge that the locations provided by GeoConfirmed do not encompass all the airstrikes visible in the footage.
5. Controversial claims and propaganda. Discredited claims of beheaded babies and sadistic acts by Hamas.
The claim of beheaded babies and sadistic acts by Hamas has been discredited. There is no credible evidence to support such allegations, and they are widely considered to be false and part of a propaganda effort to demonize the group. It's important to critically evaluate information and rely on verified sources when assessing claims related to sensitive topics.
Distribution of photographs to paint Hamas as worse than the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria ISIS.
Israeli officials have been using the images of charred bodies to garner international sympathy, but, as the report indicates, it is more likely that the horrific images are of Hamas fighters.
Critics now speculate that some of the Israeli government's most horrific photos of charred corpses and bodies burned beyond recognition may actually depict Israeli-inflicted casualties. These images of burned people inside their cars were used to justify the genocide in Gaza. Obviously, Hamas's weapons are incapable of such destruction, but Israeli Apache helicopters are.
Questions raised about the authenticity of certain images and their use for propaganda.
In the context of the Israeli war on Gaza, questions have been raised about the authenticity of certain images and their use for propaganda. The skepticism stems from concerns that some visuals circulated during the war may not accurately represent the events they claim to depict. Critics argue that discredited claims, such as those involving beheaded babies and sadistic acts attributed to Hamas, might be part of a broader propaganda strategy.
The scrutiny extends to the distribution of photographs aiming to portray Hamas as worse than ISIS. These images, presented without proper verification, raise doubts about their authenticity and the motivations behind their dissemination.
Given the nature of this war, the potential for misinformation through visual content is significant. As a result, there is a pressing need for thorough fact-checking and critical assessment to discern between genuine documentation and content that may be manipulated for propaganda purposes.
Israel has officially admitted that they killed their own civilians on October 7th. Haaretz, however you say that. The Israeli media outlet, who, by the way, breaking news, threatened to sue me. Yeah. Haaretz threatened to sue me, but your boy didn't back down. No. They threatened to sue me. They also have admitted now that Israel did in fact kill its own civilians on October 7th. And guess why they threatened to sue me? Because one of their own investigations exposed the fact that Israeli helicopters and tanks were active in firing on positions that included civilians and military personnel, including Hamas and the IDF, on October 7th, which you can then deduct through reasoning and logic that they probably killed civilians of Israeli citizenship. It was widely reported the day of that nearly 2,000 civilians were killed by Hamas terrorists coming in on paragliders. These paragliding Hamas terrorists, who were armed with nothing but rifles and homemade RPGs, managed to burn and melt hundreds of cars, burn and melt maybe hundreds of definitely hundreds of bodies to burnt crisps, and again, killed nearly 2,000 civilians, all right? Now, how do I know that? Because I was debating, Israeli government spokespeople about this very subject as the events were unfolding. They told me, Jackson, do you really condone the fact that Hamas massacred nearly 2,000 civilians? And I said, well, look, we don't really have all the facts yet. There's been widely reported and circulated videos, for example, of Hamas firing an RPG at a car. And that car was reported to be an Israeli ambulance. Turns out it was an Israeli police force's car. So you get the idea. A lot of propaganda is circulated about October 7th, and everything that happened on October 7th is being used to justify the genocide that is ongoing right now. I wouldn't bore you with these facts and these stories if it wasn't so really important to what's happening today. The slaughtering of over 5,000 children in Gaza, over 12,000 civilians in total now, okay? But the most recent developments are actually quite sinister. We've since learned through Israel's official Twitter accounts, they posted the names of those that were slaughtered on October 7th, that over half of the individuals killed were military personnel. This was even shocking news to the BBC smear artist propagandist that was interviewing me and trying to write a hit piece on me. He said, really? Are you making more stuff up? Half of them were military personnel? Prove it. So I sent him Israel's official government post stating that all the names were listed and over half of them were military personnel. He was shocked. Maybe that's why they didn't run the article. Then we learned through another really crucial piece of evidence. Israel admitted that some 200 of the bodies that they said were Israeli civilians that were killed by Hamas were actually bodies that were Hamas, and they were badly burned, so we didn't know they were Hamas terrorists. And again, those Hamas terrorists came across the border with nothing but rifles, homemade RPGs that are not capable of burning entire cars, homes, and civilians into crisps, and paragliders. I thought the question was worth asking. Well, we then learned that Israel actually released video footage of what took place on October 7th. That video footage was widely circulated on social media earlier this week, and it showed that Israeli Apache attack helicopters, financed, by the way, by U.S. taxpayers, were indiscriminately firing at anything that moved on the ground around the border of Gaza and Israel, where the breakthrough initially occurred. As you can see in this video, cars, individuals running that don't appear to be terrorists. I mean, these are people wearing what are definitively not the Adidas-clad uniforms or Hamas uniforms that we all know so well. These are people in like white t-shirts and women you can see running about. These are individuals who were targeted in the Apache attack helicopter strikes. At this point, I think it became quite clear to everyone that what happened on October 7th is not what we were led to believe. And that's okay. People get things wrong. But what I have a problem with is when governments and the entire mainstream media apparatus continue to go along with absurd lies and use those lies to justify, again, a genocide in Gaza at this very moment, okay? Now, in a dark and twisted but unexpected turn of events today, we learned something new. Haaretz has come out with a new report which indicates, per an official Israeli statement, that Israeli helicopters were responsible for murdering Israeli civilians at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Let's take a look. This is from Haaretz. Again, Israeli media, as you can see here, okay? Quote, there is a growing assessment in the security establishment that the terrorists who carried out the massacre on October 7th did not know in advance about the Nova Festival held in the kibbutz Raim and decided to come to the place after discovering that a mass event was taking place there. The security systems assessment relies, among other things, on the investigation of the terrorists and the investigation of the incident by the police, from which it appears that the terrorists intended to reach the kibbutz Raim and nearby kibbutzim. Now, this is the important part. According to a police source, an investigation into the incident also revealed that an IDF, an Israeli Defense Forces combatant helicopter that arrived at the scene from the Ramat David base, fired at the terrorists and apparently also hit some of the revelers who were there. According to the police, 364 people were killed at the festival. So there you have it. You have Israeli media citing a source from within the Israeli police investigatory team that investigated the Al-Aqsa flood and what took place on October 7th, admitting for the first time publicly that it was actually an Apache attack helicopter guided by the Israelis, because of course Hamas does not have an air force, let alone an Apache attack helicopter, who was responsible for burning and killing and murdering those civilians on October 7th. Not surprising to those of us that can attack helicopters who were responsible for many of the civilian deaths on October 7th. We'll react to the latter portion of the video which addresses that fact.
Lastly, let's discuss how an IDF commander ordered an airstrike on his own position. The very first target the Palestinian fighters attacked was the Erez checkpoint. The attack was so fierce that the IDF commander, Avi Rosenfeld, in an act of desperation, he called for an airstrike on his own position. The IDF bombed their own base in order to kill the Palestinian militants.
They called an airstrike on their own positions because they were so flooded with these Hamas, attacks that they said, okay, we need to move to desperate measures that ended up getting a lot of civilians very sadly killed. And yeah, you can make that argument. You could say, well, look, if Hamas never invaded, then, there never would have been an airstrike, an Apache attack helicopter that would have been called to fire upon the positions and whatnot. I could just as easily make the argument if there was no Israeli occupation, there'd be no armed resistance in the first place. You see how that works? Immediately published a retraction stating the following. This is what they told me to say. On October 28th, 2023, I published a post with false and baseless claims about Haaretz investigation and its reporting on the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. This post included blatant lies about the Hamas attack, which have never been reported by Haaretz. Those false claims include the deliberate minimization of the number of people Hamas killed, the diversion of blame for the atrocious manner of their deaths from Hamas, the perpetrators, onto Israel, which they have now done, actually, and they've also admitted it wasn't 2,000 civilians that were killed, and the denial of the physical abuses of victims, including mutilation committed by Hamas. I removed the false post from every platform on which I published it. So they sent me this threatening email saying, we're going to sue you, and try my best and trying to get an apology out of them, which I would share with all of you, of course. So I didn't delete my post. I'm not issuing an apology. Fuck Haaretz and fuck the Israeli government. The truth is the truth. And the truth of October 7th is, yes, civilians died. Yes, of course, Hamas did kill civilians. Yes, of course, Israel killed many civilians. They burned them to crisps. They killed many Hamas fighters as well. Now, did Hamas fighters kill civilians that were firing at them? Did they kill civilians that were, caught in crossfire? Did they kill civilians who were unarmed deliberately? Well, the evidence I've seen is that I've seen videos of civilians firing at Hamas. They fired back and they killed them, which is obviously regrettable and it's tragic and it's terrible. But I think that is very different than saying Hamas went around and killed, 1,200 civilians just to and fro for the fun of it, just to be terrorists, because they have no record of ever doing something like that. And until there's any proof that they did that, I'm not going to come out here and say that they did it and moan and groan about how they did that when it's clear that Israel actually killed a lot of the civilians through these terrible means of these, tanks and Apache attack helicopter strikes. So I guess if there's a lesson with this story, stick to your guns. Don't let powerful people try to intimidate you when you know what is right. And that's what we're going to continue fighting to do here, even when they threaten lawsuits against me. Okay, I mean, I'm not the Daily Wire, I'm not Ben Shapiro, I'm not Steven Crowder. I can't sue people, and I really don't have the means to defend myself. If I were sued myself, it'd be quite the financial blow. But look, I knew we were right, and that's why we stuck to our guns, and we were proven right in today's reporting by Haaretz. And while I definitely, I'm not happy with the fact they sent me this letter-threatening lawsuit, I do still give credit where credit is due for reporting the facts of the matter on October 7th. 6. Questions
about casualties and atrocity photos.
As per reports, eyewitness testimony and investigative efforts by outlets like the Grey Zone suggest that an Israeli tank opened fire on a home in kibbutz Be'eri, resulting in the tragic deaths of 12 Israeli non-combatants, including Liel Hetzroni. The implications of this incident go beyond conventional warfare, as it raises questions about the rules of engagement and the responsibility for civilian casualties during the war.
The examination seeks to understand the circumstances leading to the charred corpses, exploring whether they were victims of the Israeli military's actions and, if so, to what extent. This incident underscores the challenges of distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants, especially in densely populated areas where military operations intersect with civilian life.
Furthermore, it prompts a broader conversation about accountability, transparency, and the need for a comprehensive investigation into the events of October the 7th, shedding light on the human toll and the complexities of navigating a war zone.
But we'll now take a look at a new investigation published by the Electronic Intifada about what really happened on October 7th. We reveal how an Israeli general ordered tanks to fire on a house with Israeli civilians in it that day in kibbutz Be'eri, and then tried to cover the incident up with a fake story of heroism. Now, relatives of those he killed are demanding the truth. That general, Barak Hiram, also appears to have originated one of the most poisonous fabrications Israel told about October 7th, the atrocity tale that Hamas fighters tied up and executed children in cold blood. That lie, told directly to President Biden by Benjamin Netanyahu, helped lay the ground for genocide. Ali, you wrote this piece with investigative journalist David Sheen that sheds more light on what happened on October 7th, particularly how Israel killed many of its own people on that day. Walk us through these new revelations.
Thanks, Nora. Yes, as you know, this is a story we've been on since the very first day, and it's a central part of what happened on October 7th that mainstream media continue to pretend not to see. But important new pieces of information have come out in Israeli media over the last week or 2 weeks that really add to what we know.
And there's both new video evidence and new testimony. Is that right?
Yes. First, in terms of the video, just last week, Israel's Channel 12 released a video shot from an Israeli military helicopter on October 7th over kibbutz Be'eri. That's one of the Israeli colonial settlements.
We've also learned more about the Israeli officer who ordered that particular tank shelling. He's Brigadier General Barak Hiram. What did you and David Sheen find out about him?
Yeah, General Barak Hiram is a fairly senior Israeli military officer. He's held a number of prestigious commands and has in fact been named as the next commander of the Gaza division. That's the same Israeli division that was supposed to guard the perimeter around Gaza, but which was virtually destroyed and simply collapsed when attacked by the Palestinian resistance on October 7th. And Barak Hiram has tried to portray what happened in kibbutz Be'eri in a completely different and false manner, covering up how his order killed Israelis. And of course, he's tried to portray himself in a heroic manner. He portrays himself as having just rushed to the scene and taken charge and basically saved the day. And he made these claims in an interview with Ilana Dayan, one of Israel's top investigative journalists. And here's Hiram speaking to Dayan, and this was in an interview broadcast on Israel's Channel 12 on October 26th. Let's take a look.
מדווחים על אירוע בני ערובה בבארי. בפועל, למרבה הצער לא היו בני ערובה.
בשלב הזה גם יש כוח של ימ"מ שהכנסנו פנימה ליישוב, ותוך כדי שהוא מטהר את השכונה שהוא קיבל, אחת האזרחיות מצליחה לברוח מהמבנים, ונוצרת איזושהי דינמיקה או תחושה שהמחבלים שמתבצרים שם בתוך הבלוק מוכנים אולי לדבר או משהו כזה.
לנהל משא ומתן.
לכאורה, ואפילו מגיע צוות מום מטכ"לי שמנסה ליצור איתם קשר ולקרוז.
הם עונים?
הם עונים לנו בטיל RPG. ובשלב הזה אני מאשר למפקד הכוח של הימ"מ שהיה שם לפרוץ פנימה ולנסות להציל את האזרחים שכלואים בתוך אותם מבנים.
זאת אומרת, כשהכוח של הימ"מ מנהל שם באמת קרב גבורה ומסתער פנימה, עוד יש איזושהי תקווה שאולי יש בני ערובה שאפשר לחלץ?
אני חושב שבבלוק הזה היו כ-20 אזרחים, ואני חושב שכוח הימ"מ הצליח להציל את 4 מהם.
כל היתר נרצחו?
כל היתר נרצחו בדם קר.
כמה מחבלים לדעתך היו רק במתחם הזה?
בספירת הגופות הגענו ל-26 מחבלים.
רק
במתחם הזה. ושם מצאנו 8 ילדים כפותים ביחד וירועים, זוג של בעל ואישה כפותים ביחד וירועים.
Let's run that again without the sound if we can. I'd like to just summarize the points he made because there may be people listening. And so, as you can see here, he's talking to Ilana Dayan and she's kind of walking him through. She says there were no hostages. And he talks about what happened, that the commandos were on the scene, that they brought into kibbutz Be'eri. And while purifying the neighborhood, that's the term they use for their violence, one of the citizens manages to flee. Now, that's a reference to Yasmin Porat actually leaving under negotiations. And he gives the impression that negotiations were impossible, and he gives the order to the commandos to rush in and save the day. So on his order, after the negotiations fail and the terrorists, as he calls them, respond with an RPG, he authorizes the commandos, the Yamam, to burst inside and to try to save the citizens trapped in those buildings. And then the Yamam wage a truly heroic battle, according to Ilana Dayan in charge inside. And he claims that there were about 20 citizens inside. There were in fact 15, and he claims the commandos saved 4 of them. And then Ilana Dayan says all the rest were murdered in cold blood. And then Barak Hiram goes into these details where he claims we found 8 children tied together and shot, and a couple, a husband and wife, tied together and shot, and then Ilana Dayan asserts that there were no actual hostages because everyone had been murdered. So now there are a couple of outrageously false statements that David Sheen and I detail in the article. First, there were in fact extensive negotiations with the Palestinians inside, and that had led to the surrender of one of the Palestinian commanders along with Yasmin Porat. And there was another officer on the scene who was arguing with Hiram that force should not be used at that point anyway, and that negotiations should continue because, as we had seen, Yasmin Porat and this Palestinian had come out due to the negotiations. The second outrageous lie is that the Yamam, the Israeli commando force, went into the house to rescue hostages and in fact rescued 4 people. This is pure fiction. There was no rescue attempt by the commandos, and it was Barak Hiram's order to fire that ensured that everyone still alive among the captives was killed except for Hadas Dagan. So that is a complete fabrication. There was no rescue attempt. He made that up. But perhaps the most consequential lie is Hiram's claim that the captives were tied up and executed in cold blood. This is a pure fabrication. As we detail in our article, this did not happen in this incident, and there's no evidence that it happened anywhere else.
And why do you say that this is the most consequential lie? There's so many. Why is this the most consequential one?
Well, David Sheen and I believe that Barak Hiram's story that he started telling very early on, before this interview with Ilana Dayan, is the origin of one of the major lies that Israel has been telling about October 7th. It's a fabricated atrocity tale that Israel used and is still using to justify and incite genocide. A lot of people believe this. And here's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking on October 9th. So this is very early on. Let's take a look.
Savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling. Slaughtering families in their homes, massacring hundreds of young people at an outdoor festival, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Hamas terrorists bound, burned, and executed children. They are savages.
Yeah, and then now here's another clip. This is from October 11th, and it's a clip of Netanyahu speaking to President Joe on the phone.
Joe, I want to give you a clear picture of the difficult situation we face. We were struck Saturday by an attack whose savagery I could say we have not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, we had hundreds massacred, families wiped out in their beds and their homes, women brutally raped and murdered, over 100 kidnapped, including children. And since we last spoke, the extent of this evil, it's only gotten worse. They took dozens of children, bound them up, burned them, and executed them.
And look, here is Netanyahu writing on Twitter on Christmas Eve, so just a few days ago. And he says there in his tweet, we're facing monsters who murdered children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children, who raped and beheaded women, who burned babies alive, who took babies hostage. As you can see, he repeats a whole series of genocidal lies. This didn't happen. They didn't tie babies up. They didn't rape and behead women. We did a segment a couple of weeks ago on the mass rape claims and the total absence of any credible evidence of that. So there's no claiming that Netanyahu was just going off confused reports or the so-called fog of war in the early days on and after October 7th. His latest statements show that this is a deliberate campaign of lies, of incitement to genocide. And right there under his tweet that we just showed, you could see that other users of X or Twitter were posting notes pointing out that
Israel killing its own soldiers and civilians on October 7th, knowing about it and of course covering it up.
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people ask, and they say, oh, well, this is just one little incident. It's still have all these hundreds of people who were killed by Hamas. So this little incident doesn't change the picture. But even in Kibbutz Be'eri, the incident at the house where Yasmin Porat and Hadas Dagan were held, along with all those other people who were killed, is not the whole story. It's a part of the story we now know well because Yasmin Parat and Hadass Dagan lived to tell the tale, but it is not the whole story. As David Sheen and I write, we also know that Israeli forces not only used tanks in Kibbutz Be'eri, but Apache combat helicopters as well. And here's Erez Tidhar, an Israeli rescuer who was in Kibbutz Be'eri that day, describing what he saw there.
בשלב מסוים אנחנו מגיעים לבארי, וכבר בצומת אתה רואה שם שברי מכוניות ואזור קרב.
כדי לתאר לך את הסיטואציה, אתה יושב בקיבוץ בתוך מדינת ישראל, שאני מטייל שם בשבתות עם הילדים באופניים. אתה כל דקה יורד עליך טיל, כל דקה. פתאום אתה רואה טיל ממסוק שיורה לתוך הקיבוץ. אבל לא הבנתי. מסוק צה"לי יורה לתוך קיבוץ ישראלי, ואז אתה רואה טנק נוסע ברחובות הקיבוץ, מצודד את התותח ויורה לפגז לתוך בית. זה דברים שאתה לא מצליח להבין.
Ambiguities in the identification of victims, possible confusion with Hamas fighters.
The important issues. Look, I'll give you an example, Mehdi. Originally, we estimated. No, answer your question. Allow me to answer your question. I'm answering your question directly, if you'll allow me. We originally said in the atrocious Hamas attack on our people on October 7th, we had the number at 1,400 casualties, and now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. When we make a mistake, we admit that. Why does that give you permission? Why
7. Israeli government's off-the-record propaganda session. Unsettling documents and videos shown, including claims of murder, torture, and decapitation.
During an off-the-record propaganda session conducted by the Israeli government, unsettling documents and videos were presented, introducing claims of extreme brutality, including murder, torture, and decapitation, allegedly perpetrated by Hamas members. The content shared during the briefing aimed to portray Hamas as a ruthless and barbaric entity, surpassing even the notorious tactics associated with groups like ISIS.
However, the controversy surrounding these claims stems from the lack of concrete evidence and the inherently biased nature of the presentation. The authenticity and accuracy of the documents and videos have been called into question, raising concerns about the potential use of such material for propagandistic purposes.
Controversial claims of sexual assault without sufficient evidence.
Controversial claims of sexual assault without sufficient evidence weakens the Israeli position. Reports have surfaced, particularly during an off-the-record propaganda session conducted by the Israeli government, suggesting instances of sexual assault committed by Hamas members.
However, it's crucial to note that the claims lack the necessary evidentiary support, raising questions about their validity and authenticity. The absence of concrete evidence to substantiate these allegations complicates the discussion, emphasizing the importance of maintaining a rigorous standard of proof, especially when dealing with sensitive and serious accusation.
8. Conclusion.
In this video, we've discussed and analyzed various aspects of a complex and controversial situation, specifically related to the Nova Music Festival events and the corresponding footage. We delved into different perspectives, scrutinized claims made by fact-checking organizations, and examined the findings of various analyses, including those conducted by GeoConfirmed and our team. The video has highlighted the intricacies of information verification, the role of media in shaping narratives, and the challenges in ascertaining the precise details of contentious events. It underscores the importance of critical thinking, thorough research, and multiple sources when navigating complex and sensitive issues. The conclusion is a reminder of the nuanced nature of information and the ongoing efforts to uncover the truth in a world where narratives can be multifaceted and contentious. In the face of blatant Israeli propaganda, with its false claims about beheaded babies, misinformation about Shifa hospital, and deceiving narratives surrounding Hamas surrender, the shocking revelation that Israel has targeted its own people further emphasizes the urgent need to expose and counter this relentless propaganda machine.
Apologies for this interruption, but